You're listening to Media Savvy Moms with Melody and Marilyn, a podcast by Parents Aware, your go-to for information on how to talk to kids and teens about pornography and healthy sexuality. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Media Savvy Moms. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Jessica Harris. She is an author, international speaker, and creator of beggarsdaughter.com. She's going to give us some great advice as parents on having those open, honest conversations with our daughters to break the silence about addiction and talking to our girls about healthy sexuality, which, as you know, is a big topic on our show. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Marilyn for the interview.
Welcome, Jessica. We're so glad to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. Now, I've read your book, Beggar's Daughter, and it is beautifully written. So I just want to let our listeners know that anything that Jessica writes is well worth your time. Lovely writing style, very approachable, and I can't wait to talk about your story here today. In the beginning of that book, you have a phrase that says, "Grace can gloriously ruin every plan." Now, I've taken that a little out of context, but I want you to tell us a little of the unexpected joys that have come your way in recent years and becoming a new mom.
Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to go back. I needed to read the book again to figure out what the context was for that, because it's been so long since I've written it. I was like, did I say that? Where is it? But I think that it was encouraging to me because I think back to probably the biggest joy, as you said, that's come into my life since even writing Beggar's Daughter, was in the fall of 2017. I was like, all right, I'm moving back to the Midwest where I'm originally from. I am going to move back there. I'm going to become a full-time writer. I've got it all figured out. I took a trip on Labor Day weekend up to Ohio, where my grandparents lived, and out to Indiana, where one of my best friends lives, and was already scoping out, where do I want to live? Which area do I want to move to? Figuring out what kind of jobs were in different places. Right before I left for that trip, I got an email from a young man who was like, "Hey, I've read your book and I would love to order some copies, and I'd love to get to talk to you and get to know you better." And I was like, no, thank you. Have a nice life. So I go up to Ohio and Indiana, do that whole trip, and I come back, and the books that he had ordered from me were lost. I was doing bulk shipments of Beggar's Daughter at the time. I had sent the books out literally the day before I left for that trip. I get back and I have an email from him saying these books got lost. And I was like, sure they did. Sure they got lost. So I was working with him back and forth to try to get these books to him. And at the same time, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to move. I'm looking at houses. I'm talking to my best friend. She's going to let me move in with her. And my landlords dropped the bomb that, oh, yes, we're moving too. So I'm losing my apartment. So I'm going, well, obviously I have to move. Like, this is clearly God speaking. Like, I have to move. And so I'm trying to let him know, like, I'm not interested. This isn't happening. Like, I'm out of here. I'm moving back to the Midwest. It's too expensive in the DC area to live life here. I'm going to go back there. I'm going to be a writer. Like, have a nice life, buddy. Not interested. And back and forth we go until the end of October, when my landlords on a Friday night say, oh, by the way, we decided not to move. The very next Sunday, I met him in person, this man who had emailed me for books. And then the next September, we got married. So,
Sweet.
God gloriously ruined those plans as well. I'm very glad I didn't move. So we got married in September of 2018. And then we had our little girl in September of 2019.
So life is quite different in the last couple of years for you.
Yes, in a good way.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Well, congratulations on all fronts. So let's talk a little more about what led you to write the book, Beggar's Daughter. In particular, I wanted to ask you about the scripts that were given and expected to follow as women in society, and how those scripts affected you as a young girl.
So I think Beggar's Daughter, the impetus or like the power behind writing it was very much to change the conversation about women struggling with sexual addictions, or just women having even sex drives that they are allowed to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a very conservative family, a very religiously structured, of like, we don't talk about sex, you save it for marriage, don't even think about it before you're married, that kind of model. And in the middle of all that was sexually molested by a Christian school classmate when I was in elementary school, and then was exposed to pornography when I was 13 years old, became addicted to pornography, or I believe I can use that word based on my story. Some people would say, well, it can't be an addiction. Then fine, I was a very compulsive user of it.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second.
Mhm,
That's a challenging word. We've struggled with it too, the word
mhm.
addiction, because you don't want it to feel so overpowering that you can't be free of it, and yet you don't want to ignore the the very realness of the struggle that you're having, and it's hard to break free of it. So I respect you for using the word addiction.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think we have to be careful, because I think some people can use it, like you kind of said, as almost an excuse, like, oh, well, I can't help it because I'm addicted to it. On the other side of that, there are some people who overuse it. They'll write into me like, I look at pornography once every year. Eek, I'm addicted. No, you're not. So there's a balance that has to be walked. But I do believe that I was addicted to it while I was in high school, especially as I finished high school. Um, but I didn't feel like I could tell anybody. I didn't feel like it was like my little secret. And I didn't know what to do with it. Like, I didn't know, is this good? Is this bad? Is there something wrong with me, or is there something wrong with what I've been taught? Like, where is the wrong in all of this? And I didn't know how to even have that conversation with anybody. Couldn't really have it with my family. Couldn't really have it with my, like, in my religious community. I joke that my church was full of old people, and I couldn't imagine as a teenager, the granddaughter of a deacon. My grandmother taught Sunday school, my mom sang in the choir. I was like the memory verse champion, I couldn't imagine going into my pastor and telling him that I struggle with pornography. That's awkward. And I couldn't imagine going to like one of their wives and telling them like, hey, so I struggle with pornography. I could not see a safe place to have that conversation anywhere. So then I went off to college, and I got caught in college. Went to a Christian college, and they were monitoring internet, and they had my internet history report. They pulled me into the dean's office, and they said, we know this couldn't have been you. Women don't have this problem.
So you're
Which just
finding out that even if you wanted to share it with someone, I was going to ask you earlier, what do you think your pastor's reaction would have been? What do you think your mother's reaction would have been? And here you are now getting someone's reaction, and they're not believing that it could be you.
right. Well, I can even tell you that we, up until recently, have still in my family worked through some healing of people still not wanting to believe it. Like, even recently as this last week, somebody in my family warning me that if another person in my family were to read Beggar's Daughter, that there would be, quote, denial and judgment. So, I mean, I've been doing this for 11 years, speaking out on the topic. I started breaking free over 15 years ago. So like, this has been my life for a
Mhm.
while now. And even still, there's this running through my family of like, oh, you can't tell anybody. Like, if they find out, they're not going to believe you, or they're going to be mad at you, or
Oh,
so yes, back in college, I was seeing like, oh, it wouldn't have even mattered, because I thought if anybody could help me, it would be the dean staff at a Christian college, because they would have seen other girls like me. And then here they are saying, there's nobody like you. And there was so much shame in that. And I lived under that for a good year. And it wasn't until somebody said, no, we know some of you women in this room. It was at the next college I went to. they had pulled all the girls, all the female students into a room and had said, we know some of you in this room struggle with pornography and we're here to help you. That was the first time that freedom even looked possible, because that was the first time I realized, oh, I'm not the only woman in this world who's managed to get herself into this mess.
So how many
I
years
worked,
would you say that had been that you were dealing with this on your own?
I was exposed when I was 13 years old. And that conversation happened right after I turned 18. So 5 years of feeling like I was completely alone. But then I go through counseling there in the college, I begin to experience freedom. And then I kind of come out of college and back into the real world, so to speak. And nobody's talking about it anywhere. And so I was determined to move on with my life and to become a doctor or something, anything,
Uh-huh.
and just was really convicted, I think, um, in the beginning of in 2007, actually, just feeling like you need to use what you're passionate about. Well, what am I passionate about? Well, I love to write. Okay. But what would I write about? Like there's a million writers in the world. Like I'm not anything special. And just really felt this push of, you're going to share your story. Like absolutely not, like under no circumstances. And so I started to search for I started to run the same searches I had done when I was struggling with pornography, like help for women struggling with pornography, looking for stuff, and there was nothing. And I got angry. I'm like, it has been years since I've tried to find help, and you're telling me that still nobody has come forward to try to help these people. Like it made me mad.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, I finally made Beggar's Daughter. It took 2 years of me going, absolutely not. I refuse to be the person who starts this conversation.
So
No.
did you just have that impression on your own, or was there anybody else encouraging you to do that, to share?
There was nobody encouraging me to do that at all. It was so when I first started Beggar's Daughter, I did it anonymously because I was still so ashamed. I still felt like, even though, yes, they had said some of you struggle with this, and yes, I was walking in freedom, I still felt like I was an outlier. I still felt like I was alone and people weren't going to understand and people were going to judge me. So when Beggar's Daughter was first started, it was anonymous. And it wasn't until the emails started pouring in
Uh-huh.
saying, oh my goodness, I thought I was alone. I'm a woman who struggles. I can't believe that somebody's out there talking about this, that I started to go, oh, maybe I'm not alone. And then it was actually the following year, so 2010, I was speaking in Canada at a conference in Canada, and I was doing a workshop. So I was just a workshop presenter. And we announced that my workshop was going to be about lust. And they put me in one of the smallest rooms because, like, the girls' workshop never gets anybody. And when people found out what it was about, the room packed out. People skipped their workshops to come to that one. All the chairs were full. People were standing around the edge and people were sitting on the floor.
Wow.
Like these people did not come because my name's on the workshop. They came because they were looking for what hope the workshop could offer. And I got this amazing opportunity to just stand back and watch as God started setting people free, setting women free in that room. And it was a Catholic conference, and I had nuns coming up to me and saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so great to know that I'm not alone. And I remember thinking, you're a nun.
Wow.
You've got to be kidding me. But I'm just like, it just was mind blowing to me. And it was like, I just had this feeling of, you can go and do whatever you like with your life. If you want to be a doctor, go for it. If you want to be, a writer and do magazines or whatever, go for it. But how can you, knowing that these women are out there, knowing that you're not alone, how can you walk away and leave them there?
Wonderful. I've been able to hear you speak, but you have some of your presentations are online. And I don't think those women knew. I mean, they didn't know your message and who you were, but they also didn't know the quality of your speaking. and how entertaining and fun you can be while you speak about such difficult topics. When we come back from the break, I want to go back to that idea of what you wanted to become and move on from there. So we'll come back in a minute. When parents share with me their concern over a child struggling with pornography, I always recommend they check out Fortify. Fortify is an amazing recovery tool that can help your teen learn to develop their own plan towards success. It's easy to sign up, it's designed to engage, and it's free for teens. Best of all, Fortify is science-based and has a proven track record of helping thousands of individuals find happiness by regaining their freedom from pornography. Visit joinfortify.com/media savvy moms to learn more. And we're back talking with Jessica Harris, author of Beggar's Daughter. And in this second half, I want to just go back and talk about some of the vulnerability that you felt as a teenager. You've mentioned about being alone and not having anyone to talk to about this, but just kind of what made you feel trapped in the experience and who you wanted to become, or what kind of confusing messages you were getting. And then if we can turn it around and talk about the advice that we can give to parents on how to have these conversations with our daughters. But let's go back first and talk about you and you as a teenager.
Right. So I was a bit of a people-pleasing teenager and really spent my whole teen career, if you will, trying to make people proud of me, make people happy, and to meet a standard almost of perfection. And that's why I decided to become a doctor. I was good at science and math, and it was like the epitome of amazingness if you could become a doctor. And I was getting 4.0 grades in school, straight A's, and was top of my class when I graduated. So it just seemed like the impressive thing to do for people. And as a side note, I actually find that a lot with women who struggle. And I joke that we try to become the Proverbs 32 woman, almost as a way of distancing ourselves from our struggle, as if we can invest so much into this perfect life that we somehow make this struggle go away.
So Proverbs 32 being...
So Proverbs 31, a Proverbs 31 woman is like the epitome of like a perfect life and a perfect Christian wife, and how she maintains her home and still has a farm somehow, and she makes her own clothes, and she does all these amazing things. And then the idea is that Proverbs 32 is like even better than that. Like it doesn't exist. It's even better. And just this idea that if I have this image of being this model perfect woman, that it makes this struggle that I have less. And what we don't realize is it actually makes it harder. But we try so hard to invest ourselves in this perfect life as a way of trying to break free from the struggles that we have.
So a little overcompensation, or a lot of overcompensation.
Yes, a lot of overcompensation. And what it does is it just makes it worse, because then that pumps up shame. That's where the root of shame is. It's this idea of, I am supposed to be this perfect person and I am not. Something is wrong with me. So I'm supposed to be this doctor and this straight A student, and I'm supposed to be the best of the best, but behind closed doors, I am not. Something is wrong with me. Okay. And that's that message of perfection and that standard that we can hold is really where a lot of shame comes from. It doesn't come from our struggle. It comes from the standard that we have of perfection that we think we have to meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Once you're aiming for this perfection and you've got this compulsion to use pornography, how did this, talk to us about it feeling like a trap or a prison that you couldn't get out of?
So when I was finishing high school and wanting to become a doctor and trying to move forward in that, pornography had become an out of control thing in my life. It was starting to threaten that dream. I didn't see anything wrong with it at that point in my life, but it was getting in the way. And I couldn't stop it. And that's when I really started to struggle with feeling stuck and feeling trapped,
So you
because
had tried to quit. You had
I
tried
had tried to quit because I didn't want it to threaten my ability to become a doctor or my ability to impress people, to be fair.
So how, I'm going to stop you for a second, because
Mhm.
how would this habit threaten that dream?
Right. So I was using pornography to the point that I was using school computers to look up erotica, which is written out stories.
Mhm.
Um, I would come home from school and I would spend all afternoon into the evening. I was home with my mom. My siblings lived in a different home. Um, so while my mom was at work, I was spending the entire time online looking at pornography. And then once my mom would go to bed, I would get up and go out and try to find the adult channels on the television. And this is back in the day when you could actually still see things on channels you didn't have.
Mhm.
So I would look them up and I would spend all night. Like I had to have it. Like my world revolved around it. So I was losing sleep. I wasn't studying anymore. I was having a hard time functioning just because I would go to bed at like 4 o'clock in the morning and then get up at 6 to go to school, because that's how consuming it was. And it stayed that way into college. I went off to college and would watch it all night with my roommate sleeping right behind me on a big dinosaur 2003 desktop computer.
Mhm.
Um, Watch it all night into the morning, go to my morning work study job. I had to vacuum the student center, come back from that, and I would sleep through my first class of the day because I had spent all night looking at pornography online. So it was that compulsive.
I'm glad you
Mhm.
mentioned this, because I think, if we're just listening to your story, we're thinking, well, yeah, she's just a young girl and she's finding inappropriate content online. No one has this idea that this is all consuming of your becoming your life, right? It's taking
Right.
all your energy and distracting you, which is why, yes, the content is terrible, but it's life altering as well, because it takes you off on a different course.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I got caught in college and they told me women don't have this problem, I felt like I had a choice to make at that point. Either like I felt like I could not continue to live life like this, like with, I call it masks, just wearing mask after mask. Like I I felt like I could not be a doctor anymore. Like I was never going to find the freedom. I was going to hate living a lie, basically. And so if I could not get free, then I felt like I didn't have a choice but to succumb to it. And so I went from wanting to be a doctor to wanting to be or not wanting to be, but deciding I had to be a porn star. Like that, that was when it came down to, oh, you're never going to get out of this. I said, well, I don't want to live my whole life a lie. So I might as well just jump in, because those are the women that people understand are like this. And if I want to be accepted and I want people to know who I truly am and be true to who I am, then that's what I have to do. I have to be a porn star.
Crazy, crazy. I mean, crazy for me to look at you here and to hear your story. Here you are at a Christian college, just doing your thing, and you're feeling like the only option for you to feel accepted is to become what you are seeing online. But what I'm getting at is, how do we recognize what our daughters need, and how do we reach them? What can we offer to young girls growing up today that maybe we've missed in years past? What can we do differently, and how can we help girls who may be struggling, or help girls so that they don't have to go through this journey on their own?
Right. I think super important for parents to understand that my story is now becoming an old story. I went and spoke at a church a couple years ago to a multi-generational group from 12 years old all the way up to their grandparents. And a 12-year-old girl at that church went to her friend's mom and said, I don't understand what this girl is doing here. What's the big deal? Every girl watches porn. That
Oh,
is a 12-year-old girl in a church. And not long after that, a church reached out to me. They had done an anonymous survey of their youth group, and 100% of their 9th and 10th grade girls struggled with pornography. So my story of kind of being among the millennial generation, which is my generation, it's a little more rare. It's probably around maybe 30% of us. But as you get down into today's teenagers and today's college girls, it's far more prevalent. And so if I walk into a room full of those women at an event, I assume that 75 to 100% of them have been exposed to and are struggling with pornography in some way. The big thing for this generation is sexting. Like, that's what's huge for them, the pressure to become someone else's pornography. I've been there. It's not where you want to go, but they just feel so pressured, and then they feel so broken. And so I think a huge message for parents is they're doing that because they want that acceptance, and they want to feel that connection, and they believe that that's the only way that they can find it. And so for parents, I think it's so huge to be having conversations about healthy sexuality. Your girls have sex drives, like we just do. And so stop acting like we're all like, little white angels, with flowing white robes and lights, floating around us, and we never think a sexual thought. Your girls think them. They are experiencing pressure to watch pornography, and to be told that that's how they're supposed to be and act and perform. And they're being taught that that is acceptance and love. And we have a calling almost as parents to teach them what true acceptance and love is. And as part of that conversation of healthy sexuality, teaching them this is what connection and intimacy looks like. It's not standing in front of a webcam and bearing all. It looks different. And so we have to be the source of the healthy communication about sexuality and about connection and intimacy and acceptance for our daughters, especially.
Thank you. So no more skirting these issues under the rug, avoiding them. We just have to be bold as parents and talk to our kids about sex, talk to our daughters about sex in a way, as you said, teach them what true connection and love is, and let them know that pornography and the sexting, and even though those feel like they are giving them a sense of belonging and attention, that they're not going to be fulfilling and rewarding. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, we're going to give the time. We're so grateful, but we're going to give you a chance to speak again in just a moment. Melody is going to offer us a bit of a recap of our conversation, and then we'll come back to you for a challenge for parents.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica. There's so much to touch on. It was hard to kind of sort through and just hit the highlights because it's so beautiful to hear your story in your own words. Some of the highlights that I caught were that there's power in changing the conversation about female addiction, and if we want to use that word, that it's a powerful word to use, and we need to be thoughtful and mindful about how we use the word addiction. But in just changing the conversation about female sexuality in general, there's power in changing that conversation. You also mentioned that even when girls come forward, still after years and years, there is still going to be denial and judgment, even in our own families. And to be aware that that's going to happen, but to keep going and keep pushing the topic, because we need to not we need to be undaunted by those kind of forces and to keep the conversation going anyway. And you mentioned that shame comes from setting high standards and then not reaching them. And we saw a lot of that in your story too. And also a reminder that when girls are exposed to pornography, it's not just oh, there are bad pictures or there is, erotica and it's bad, but that it can become an all-consuming, life-altering experience. And then as we wrapped up, the biggest tip that you gave to parents was your story is becoming an old story. That in this generation, every girl watches porn is the attitude that's being flung around, which is really sad. But we need to be aware as parents that this is the attitude, and that among peers, they expect it of each other. And we need to be aware that girls do have a sex drive, that we need to not deny that, and we need to acknowledge it, but also to talk to our girls not in a shamed way about it, and not expect them to have a squeaky halo, but to have open, honest conversations about healthy sexuality, and to set a standard of what true acceptance and love and connection look like, so that they know what that is from us, and they're not looking to their peers, and they're not looking to the world, and they're not looking to pornography, and especially sexting, because that's a big, big thing in this generation for those kind of connections. So we're going to turn it back around to you. We know you have a challenge for our parents today. Would you like to tell us what that is?
I would love to tell you. I use this a lot in the events when I speak to parents. And so it's perfect for parents of children of any age, maybe 5 and older, because little ones will be a little too creative. But especially of parents of teenagers and preteens, the challenge is this: sit down with your child and say, tell me your story. And ask them to tell you their life story from their perspective. You've been there for the whole thing, more than likely. But what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to get a read on their connection with you, their connection with others, and how they're viewing their life. And so you sit down and you say, tell me your story. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to cut in and correct you. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to listen, and everything you tell me is going to be kept private, unless obviously it involves some sort of abuse, which you need to discuss with them. But just sit down and just listen to them tell you their story from their perspective. Depending on their age, you'd be able to work in things like, I tell parents when they're talking about sex, don't throw the sex conversation on your child. Instead, go, what's been your exposure to it? Have you heard anybody else talk about this? What do you know about it? Let them lead the dialogue. Let them tell you, what are you doing? You're facilitating intimacy and connection with your child and acceptance. You're doing all of those things that they're looking for in someone else. And you're not judging them. You're not shaming them. You are showing yourself to be an open door for them, that they can come to you with anything. And that even if their perspective is different from yours, that you're not going to correct that. You're not going to get mad about it. You're not going to say, well, no, I told you, like, that's not what I meant when I said that. Just let them tell you their story. Sit down with them. Even if they're more comfortable writing, let them write out their story. And when they're 6, it might look different than when they're 16. But I'd say that's such a huge exercise for parents to do. Take the time to sit down and truly try to get to know who your children are as people. Because yes, you've been there for the story, but you have not been them for their story. So get to know them and their story.
I love that challenge. That is great. So we are again grateful for your time today, and we look forward to hearing more about your upcoming writing and the work that you're doing. Take care.
Thank you guys so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Media Savvy Moms podcast. For detailed show notes and links to any of the resources mentioned today, visit parentsaware.info. To connect with us on social media, find us on Instagram at Media Savvy Moms and on Facebook and Twitter at Parents Aware. We would love to get your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to this podcast. Until next week, let's keep talking.